All right, I've taken my bag now and I've turned it so that the fleece side is out. And now we're going to sew the bottom of the bag closed. So we just want to pin along this bottom edge here. Make sure that your edges are even. And we will sew 1/2 inch up from the raw edge on this black seam line that we marked at the beginning of the DVD. So go ahead and pin, and then let's meet over at the sewing machine. We're now going to sew across the bottom seam of the bag. We'll use a stitch length of 2.5, and we're going to sew on that 1/2 inch sewing seam line. Now, we do have 2 layers of faux suede in here, so if your machine is having trouble, go up to the 3.0 stitch length. I'm coming up to the end and I backstitch. Now we'll go over to the pressing area and we'll press the seam open. We're going to take our bottom seam that's been stitched closed, we'll open it up and we're going to press this open. I'd like you to take your little muslin pressing cloth because we are going to be touching the faux suede. So just press that seam open. Now that we finished pressing the bottom seam on the bag, there's another detail that I really like to put on the bottom of the bag. It doesn't do anything to give the bag any structural integrity. It's basically what we did on the sides here, where we top stitched our side seams down. It looks beautiful from the bottom, and I just like the look of it. It is hard to do though. If you don't want to do it here, I would say, well, if you really don't want to, no big deal. I think it's more important to do it on the sides because these side seams can pop out if the bag gets washed. If you don't do it on the bottom, if you don't tack your seams down on the bottom, it's not as critical because you have the weight of the lining in there crushing that seam down anyway. But it does look really nice on the outside of the bag. So if you decide that you want to do it, you want to flip the bag up and you really want to fold down these sides. Don't worry about wrinkling it up because you can press it all out later. So just fold down the sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to maneuver this into the sewing machine, and we will be sewing on both sides of the bottom seam, 1/4 inch away from the seam. Now Jamie's worked really hard so that you guys can see down to the bottom of the bag here. Here is my center seam. And what I want to do is I want to maneuver this bag into the machine so that I can put my presser foot on each side of this seam and sew a 1/4 inch top stitch all along the length. So let's go give that a try. Now, what you want to do is where you rolled this down, you want to put that underneath your presser foot and you want to pull it, keep pulling, pulling, pulling until you get to the bottom of the bag. You need to find the beginning of that seam, and I'm there right now. Now the next thing you need to do is you need to put your hand underneath where the seam actually is, and you have to make sure that it's open and that it's lying flat. And then you're going to put down your presser foot and you are going to sew 1/4 inch away from the edge of this seam. We'll sew down this side, and then we're going to actually move back to the top again, and we'll sew down this side here. So back stitch. Now, try and make this straight, because unlike the side seams, you are going to see this. So you don't want to be going all wiggly on your line. Go slow and keep it straight. Keep checking the seam underneath to make sure that it's lying open, nice and flat. If you need a little help pulling it from the back, go ahead and do that. I know it's a little difficult sewing on the faux suede. It's not very slippery, and that's why it gets hung up. I'm not sure how well you're seeing this here. I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way so that you can see it. Just want to keep going on slowly till you get to the end of the seam. And we're almost there. We're not too far away. We're at the very close to the end of the seam now. Get to that last few inches. And when you get to the end, just go ahead and backstitch. Then you can remove the work and go back to the beginning again. Now when I go back to the beginning, and once my threads are clipped, I'm just sliding right back to the beginning. And now I will place my presser foot on the other side of the seam line. And I will start to sew down that side. Now, if you get this done, I'll be very proud of you, and you have permission to go eat a few bonbons. Keep checking to make sure that seam is laying flat under there. Now I need to pull here a little bit. It's not happy coming up to the end. And now I backstitch, and we're done. Now you want to wiggle this out. I'm going to clip my threads off. Wiggle back to the beginning, and then slip up the side, and you're out completely. Now here's the bottom of the bag with the center seam line and the two top stitching lines. Our last step for this piece, which is even the easiest step in the whole process for this part of the bag, is we're going to close this seam up, this side seam that goes right below the pocket. What you want to do is turn your piece this way, and you want to match up your bottom seams, the bottom center seams. You want to make sure that there's nothing under here. Your pocket will end right where that stitching line is. And you're just going to put in a couple of pins. I like to try and make sure that my bottom center seam is lined up with the side seam there. Just need a couple of pins here, that's it. If you want to put in a couple more, go ahead and put in 2 more. Don't have to. Then I want you to flip it and do the same thing on this side. Match up your center seam. Push out that little triangle shape there. Make sure nothing's getting caught. And go ahead and finish putting in your pins here. We'll go over to the sewing machine and sew this down. I'm going to go across the bottom of the bag here. These are the lines that we marked at the very beginning of the DVD. These are the 1/2-inch stitch lines. So you're going to put the piece under your presser foot. I'm going to try and get away with a 2.5 stitch length here, but if I can't, I will go up to the 3.0. Back stitch. I'm going to back stitch. Then I'm going to flip over to the other side. And I'm going to sew the seam, same seam on this side. I did state the 2.5-inch stitch length. I did not increase it, even though I probably should have. Now, after you've sewn both of these side seams, I want you to visually look down into the bag. I want you to feel with your fingers to make sure everything is the way it should be, that nothing's caught in there. And if you're happy with it, I want you to then go and stitch over those lines a second time. And then after you stitch over them the second time, I want you to take your scissors and trim down that seam about halfway. If you feel more comfortable turning the bag right side out before you do any clipping, go ahead and do that. You want to make sure that everything down there looks nice and square and nothing is caught, and the pockets look like they're nice and straight on the sides. Now we're getting ready to put the snap-on that is going to close the front of the bag when the bag flap is closed. We want to go ahead and find the centers of both the front and the back of the bag. So I'm going to turn this sideways. What I'd like you to do is take your side seams, put your side seams together, just like that, and then fold in half. And where I have this pin right here, that's your center front. Again, seams together, fold, and where I have the pin, that's my center back. Now, we need to find the position that we want to put the snap in. The snap is going to go in this area down here. I already know my center front here. Now, I'd like you to measure the distance between the edge of this pocket and the edge of this pocket. Divide that measurement by 2 and then mark the center here. I'm not going to tell you what my measurement is because it may be different than your measurement. It's going to be very slightly different, but may be different. But the object of the game is we want to find the center of the bag. If you position these properly, this should be the center. And the way you're going to check for sure it's the center is that this line right here should match up with your pin. So put a ruler down on your bag and line everything up perpendicular and parallel. And then look and see if this mark down here lines up with your pin. And mine does. So now I know that this really is the center of my bag. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to take your ruler and you want to mark down 1 1/4 inches from the top seam line where the faux suede is. And you're going to make a little mark there. Then I'm going to go up to the chalk line here and I'm going to make a little crosshatch. And this is where my snap is going to go, right at that crosshatch, right there. So I'm going to do a little circle there. That's where I want the snap to be placed. So again, just check your measurements. You should be 1 1/4 inches down from this line right here where the faux suede is. And I am 1 1/4 inches down, and I know that that's my center. So now I take my little snippy scissors and I take my snap and I'm going to press the legs of the snap. Remember, this is the larger snap. This is the 3/4 inch one that we put aside before. So I take the legs, I place it on the crosshatch lines centered above the intersection where I drew in that little dot. I press it in. I have an impression from the legs. And now I'll just give it a little bit of chalk. I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well, but you understand from all the other snaps how to do this. It's the same thing. Now I know where to make my little snip marks. So I just point my scissor into that leg. Make sure you have nice sharp scissors for this. And you just give it a little snip. And then I'm going to give a little snip to the other leg. You want to make sure you've gone all the way through. And I have on both. You put in your snap. Then you put in the cap that goes over the legs of the snap. Right here like this. And then you're going to push down those legs to lock in that cap. And that's all there is to it. The important things you need to know here is that this snap needs to be centered 1 1/4 inches from this seam line right here where the faux suede starts, and it needs to be in the center of the bag. And if you got that correct, your flap should close and look centered. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to put on the back flap. Now I have my bag flap here, and I'm measuring it to see how wide it is. And I'm taking my measurement and I'm dividing it by 2 to find the center. Now again, I'm not going to tell you what this measurement is because it may be slightly different for each one of us depending on how we sew. So you just do the math and find the center. When you do find the center, mark it with a Sharpie. then go ahead and double check and make sure that you get the same measurement on each side. And I do. So now I'm going to take this flap and I'm going to pin it to the back of the bag, and we'll get ready to sew it on. Now, I took the pin out of the back of the bag where I marked the center, and I just made a little black mark with my Sharpie to tell me that that's the center. And I have the black mark right up here on the flap to tell me that that's the center. I want to line those two marks up. And now I'm going to pin the flap on. So you go ahead and finish pinning to each end. Now that you're done pinning your flap, we're going to go over to the machine and baste the flap down. Now, of course, at the beginning of the DVD, I had you score all those half-inch sewing seam lines, and that's where we're going to be basting from, that line right there. I have the bag in the machine with the flap pinned on, and now I'm going to baste across that stitching line right there, that half-inch stitching line. I'm using a 2.5 stitch length right now. Go to 3 if you need to. And you can stop when you reach the end of the flap. You don't really need to back stitch right now if you don't want to, because we're really just basting this in place. I have pocket-chi here. This is going to go into the lining of the bag. And what I'd like you to do with this piece is I'd like you to score a chalk line directly down the center of this pocket. It should measure approximately 12 inches in length now that it's finished with the side seams. If it's not exactly 12, just find the center and put it wherever the center is. And we can put that one aside now. And this is pocket F, also goes into the lining of our bag. We want to mark in a chalk line 5 inches from each edge. So we have a chalk line 5 inches from this edge and a chalk line 5 inches from this edge. Now I want you to put this aside for a minute. We're going to do a little bit of work on the lining. I have piece E here, and piece E is our lining, and we have 2 piece E's for the lining. So we're going to do a little bit of marking on each one of those lining pieces. I want you to take your ruler, and from this edge here, I want you to mark in 3 1/2 inches. And then I want you to mark in 3 1/2 inches from this edge. So now we should have 2 marks on your lining. They're each 3 1/2 inches in from the edge. One here and one here. Now I want you to take your ruler and I want you to mark 10 inches down from this raw edge and mark a line there. Now I want you to turn your lining piece. And I would like you to mark in 8 inches down from this raw edge. And I'd like you to mark all the way across, one edge to the other. So here's our line, 8 inches down from this edge. Another thing I'd like you to do is I want you to take your black Sharpie and on that chalk line, just make a little black mark that's no more than a ½ inch in. It's going to be a little registration mark for us later on. Now turn your lining back again. And I want you to take one of your pockets. It doesn't matter which pocket. Either one will work. And I want you to flip it face down with the main fabric down towards the lining. And I want you to line it up with the chalk line that we scored right here. That's the chalk line that's 10 inches down from the top. And I want you to pin that in place. Now I'd like you to go ahead and mark your second lining piece exactly the way that you marked this one. You're going to put chalk lines in all the same places. You're going to put your little black marks in the same places and set your other pocket in exactly this way. Now it doesn't matter, it's not going to make any difference because the pockets are actually the same size. One pocket is just a little bit higher than the other, but width-wise they're the same. They'll fit into this space the same way that this one did. And these are pockets F and G that are going into the lining. The last thing that you need to do here before you go and prepare your second lining piece with the pocket is score a line 1/2 inch in from this raw edge. And now we're ready to sew our pockets into our lining. I've sewed the seam of the pocket on the first lining piece, and now I'm going to go and sew it in on the second piece for you. So I have the pocket here all pinned into place, and I'm going to sew down this chalk line. I'm at a 2.5 stitch length. I'm in the center needle position and I'm doing a straight stitch. When you're sewing, make sure that this isn't flipped underneath so that it doesn't get caught into the seam. And I am at a 2.5 stitch length, but if you need to go to a 3 at this point because you're starting to deal with some thickness here, you can go ahead and do that. So I start a back stitch, then I'm going to sew across the width of the bottom. If you have a walking foot, you might want to use it right now. I haven't found that I need it, but it doesn't hurt to have it in there. And back stitch at the end, and you're done with that seam. I have my first piece of lining with the pocket sewn down 1/2 inch above the raw edge. Now I'm going to take a marker, and as we've done before, we want to take out that little bulk on the corner. I'm drawing it in so that you can see what I'm actually cutting off. So you just want to go ahead and snip that. Be careful not to snip into any cutting lines. Or I should say, don't snip into any stitching lines. You can clip on the cutting line. So we have that out. And now what I'd like you to do is trim this seam allowance here about halfway. So just go ahead and trim it all the way across. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to get some bulk out of there. That's all we're doing. Okay. Once you have that trimmed down, I want you to flip your pocket up and put it into place, just like this. And then I want you to steam down that seam real good. Or if my daughter was here, she would say well. So steam it down well. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to mark chalk lines 1/8 of an inch from each one of these edges. And when we go back to the machine, we'll be sewing our edges down. We're going to sew these chalk lines down, and then we'll sew this edge down. And I actually, when I sew these seams here, I go over them twice because we want this part of the pocket, especially up here, to be very strong. This is going to get a lot of pressure on it from being used all the time. So it's a stress point here. So I double sew each one of these lines. So right now I'm going to go ahead and I am going to mark in those chalk lines for my 1/8 inch seams. Again, if you feel confident that you don't need to draw these lines, then you don't need to. Just line up with your presser foot on your machine. Once this pocket is in place with your stitching lines drawn in, go ahead and secure it down with a few pins. All right, once you have that pinned down, we're going to flip this over. And I want you to take piece M, which was one of your contrast pieces. We have not worked with this piece since we did our initial cutting. And I want you to line the edge of this up with this edge up here and pin it in place. And then I want you to take your ruler and I want you to chalk a line 1/2 inch down from the top of that contrast piece. And this chalk line will be our 1/2 inch stitching line. So here's where we'll be stitching when we go back to the machine. Now, when we get to the machine, we're going to be stitching straight across the bottom here. And usually I do this just by putting the edge of my presser foot on the edge of the fabric here. So we're going to be stitching here, and then we'll be stitching these lines. And we'll be stitching each one of them down twice. Now this piece is done. We're going to take our second lining piece. I want you to prepare everything on this piece the same way we just prepared the other piece. There's just one small exception, and I'll show you that right now. You're still going to clip off your corners. And you're still going to trim this seam allowance here, about halfway. We're going to press it up and steam it. Now, the difference is we only stitch this line in the middle. We stitch this line and our two ends down. So we have one less line to stitch on this pocket than we did on the other. So you're going to go ahead now, you're going to secure this down with some pins, and then you're going to put that contrast piece M on the other end, just the way we did on the first piece. My first piece of lining is in the machine, and I'm going to be sewing down that contrast piece. And I will be sewing along this chalk line right here. Back stitch. Back stitch when you get to the end and take your work out of the machine. Now I'm going to move right on to the second piece of lining because I want to do the same operation that I just did here. So I have my second piece of lining. Now I want to point out to you, remember when we marked all of our pieces in the beginning of the DVD, we marked 1/2 inch seam lines around the perimeter of the lining piece. If you would rather sew from this side, fine, your line's already there. So I'm going to sew this one for this side in case anyone prefers to do it that way. Either way is fine. I'm still sewing the contrast piece down. I'm not doing anything differently than what you just saw me do. I'm just doing it from the reverse side. And now both contrast pieces are sewn onto the lining. I have one of my lining pieces here with the pocket that needs to be sewn in. We want to stitch a line straight across the bottom of the pocket, and I will be using the edge of my presser foot to guide me on the edge of this pocket. And I will be using a stitch length of 2.5. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into my machine. I'm going to start stitching. I'm going to back stitch here, and then I will stitch all the way across. Make sure that nothing is caught underneath that pocket when you're stitching. We all hate to rip out, so I try to remember to be careful. I'm not going to say that I never catch anything into a seam, because I do, but I try to always double check before I start sewing. I finished sewing along the bottom of the pocket. Now I'm going to turn and sew up this side. I'm going to sew that 1/8 inch away from the edge of the pocket along the chalk line. Back stitch. Make sure that 90-14 sharp needle is in there. That's going to help you out a lot with these seams. I'm going to pull this out, and now I move over to the next chalk line. I'm going to sew this chalk line down now. Back stitch. Back stitch. Trim my threads off. Now I'm moving over to the next chalk line. Back stitch. Back stitch. Clip my threads. And now I'm going to sew that last chalk line. And for this one, I'm more comfortable sewing from this direction. So I'm just going to turn my work. Now, in general, when you're sewing, you should always let the feed dogs do the work. That's why they're on your machine. They're designed to pull the fabric through for you. Sometimes the machine does have a little bit of trouble. First off, I'm not using a walking foot here. A walking foot helps because when you have a walking foot, you have feed dogs on both the top and the bottom. So if you're not using a walking foot here and you're having a little bit of trouble, it's okay to give that piece a little bit of a push into the machine. But in general, I would tell you don't do that. Let your feed dogs do the work for you. Backstitch. And now you're done. And what I want you to do is I want you to go over all of those seams one more time so that you have a double row of stitching there. And at the top of the pocket, where your stress points are, where you're putting things in and out of the pocket, that's going to strengthen those points there for you. I'm going to sew down the pocket on the second piece of lining now. We'll do the same thing we did before. We're going to sew straight across the bottom of the pocket, just using the width of the presser foot to do that. This pocket has one less line. We're just going to sew one line right down the center. And the other thing I want to point out to you is that I did not put chalk lines on this one. I'm just going to use my presser foot. I'm going to line up with my presser foot for that 1/8 inch there. But if you need to have that line, you go right ahead and put it in. Now, I did not show you on the first piece of lining, but I did tell you I want you to sew over these lines one more time to give that extra strength that we need. So I'm just going and doubling over my line now. Backstitch. And I want you to do that on all of the lines, on the pocket, on both lining pieces. You don't need to do it across the bottom. Just on these vertical lines that I'm doing now. And that's it. So now you just go ahead and finish up with that and we'll move on to the next step. We have our lining piece back again. The pockets are all sewn in. You can start getting rid of some of these stickers. You don't really need them anymore, not on these pieces. What we want to do now is we want to take this contrast piece and we're going to flip it and we're going to iron it down. And then we're going to flip it to the wrong side of, or I should say the fleece side of our lining. And you want to iron that down well. See, my daughter's teaching me something about grammar. Now, what we want to do is we want to pin. We're going to pin along this side. We want to pin over this chalk line, and then we're going to pin over this side. So I'll start putting those in. I always like to pin perpendicular. You may have a different method, that's fine. Use whatever method you like. Now the way you see me doing things on the DVD, those are my preferred ways to do things. You don't have to. If you have a way that works better for you, then go ahead and do it. As long as it works, as long as it gets the operation done that you're doing, that's fine. I always tell people there's no right and wrong in sewing. It's whatever works best for you. Now, we're going back to the machine. I want you to do the same exact thing with the second piece of lining. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch right along the edge. Use the edge of your presser foot right on the edge of this piece here, on the edge of your lining. You're going to sew straight down. Then I want you to sew right on top of that chalk line all the way across. And then we're going to come up here again with the edge of the presser foot right on the edge of that lining piece, all the way up. And this is really just a basting process that we're doing right now to keep all of this in place. So let's go move over to the machine, prepare your second piece, and let's move over to the machine. You should have your contrast piece all pinned into place now on your lining. I have the first piece of lining here. We're going to start by stitching in the ditch all the way down here. Then we're going to stitch along this edge using the edge of the presser foot as our guide. Then we're going to stitch straight across this stitching line. And then we're going to go up this side again with the edge of the presser foot on the edge, on the raw edge of the lining. So let's put it in the machine. So we have the lining in the machine. Same as always, I'm using a stitch length of 2.5 with a straight stitch. I'm in center needle position and I'm going to go ahead and stitch in the ditch. Back stitch. I do want you to backstitch here again. And now we're going to turn the work and we're going to sew with the edge of the presser foot on the edge, on this raw edge of the lining. Since this is a basting stitch, you just don't want to go over that ½ inch line because that's the ½ inch in is going to be your seam line. So just stay within the raw edge and your seam line and you'll be fine. Okay, I'm down to the chalk line and I'm going to turn my work. And you do want to stay on the chalk line as best you can. Those open toe foots are great. You get really wonderful visibility when you're sewing. Now we're turning, and again we're going to sew with the presser foot up against the raw edge of the lining. And then you're done. You don't need to backstitch here. This is just a basting stitch for you. And now we're done with that piece of lining. Go ahead and sew the other piece in exactly the same way. We have finished basting in our contrast lining here. What we want to do is trim these edges off. So just line your ruler up with the edge of your lining piece and cut that off. And then we want to do this one Go ahead and cut that off. Make sure that you don't slip and cut here. You don't want to do that. Now I want to flip this over. And we have a little bit of excess fabric here. I just want you to go ahead and trim that with your scissors. Trim it so it's about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch away from the actual stitching line. Then go ahead and do the same thing with the second piece of lining. Okay, we're going to move on to our next step. What I'd like you to do is, I want you to line your 2 pieces of lining up just like this. And now we're going to put our zipper in between these 2 pieces. Now, I know I'm not sitting there with you on your couch, but I know somewhere someone is groaning. And I want you to just get over your fear of zippers right now, because it's really easy. And I'm going to show you how to do it. You'll never be afraid of a zipper again. I have our zipper here. This zipper tape is about 1/2 inches wide. We're going to take our basting tape and we're going to stick it down to the very edge of the zipper and run it the whole length of this zipper. Now this zipper is longer than the actual opening. We want it to be longer. We're going to trim away what we don't need after everything is sewn together. So go ahead and put down your tape on one side. Then you're going to go and line up the tape on the other side. Just stick it down good. One of the nice things about using this tape is that once I pull this paper off, it's of course sticky on both sides. And if I place anything down with this sticky tape, it is repositionable. So you don't have to worry if you don't get it placed correctly the first time. You have more than enough chances to move it around. Now, I have my zipper pull facing me, and I want it to be facing me because this pocket over here is the one that's going to go towards the back of the bag where the bag flap is. And this is the pocket that I like to have on that side. So if I put the zipper pull over here, when I open the bag, I like to open from left to right. Now, if you don't want to open from left to right, then reverse it if you'd rather open from right to left. But that's something that you need to think about. Which way do I want this zipper to open when I open my bag? So this is the way I put in mine. And that's with the pocket that has the 3 sections in it. So now I pull this paper off. Sometimes it's a little hard to grab, and if you find it really difficult, sometimes if you score it with a pair of scissors, you can get it off easier. If one end isn't coming off easily for you, then go to the other end, pull it off from the other end. If that doesn't work, score the paper with a pair of scissors. Now we're going to place the zipper in between both of these sections. The zipper pull needs to be outside of these raw edges. So here's my zipper pull and here's the raw edges. Now if you're afraid that you might accidentally take this zipper pull completely off your zipper, what you can do is take a stapler, put a couple of staples in both ends, in this end and the end at the bottom, and that will prevent the zipper pull from coming off. I usually don't do that, but if you need to do that, go ahead. Now, I'm going to place this down flat on my mat, and I'm going to take my zipper And I'm going to line up this edge right here, right along the edge of the zipper teeth. And I'm just pressing it down all along the length of the zipper. Press it in there well. The other lining piece is going to be pressed down on the zipper tape as well. And we want to make sure that these raw edges are at the same spot. They need to line up in a perfect line. So you put that down there, you press it in. Now you press the tape down with this edge here along the edge of the zipper teeth. And that's all that you need to do. Just make sure everything is nice and secure, nice and even. And we're going to move over to the machine now, and we're going to sew both sides of the zipper down. We're about to sew down our zipper. Now, as far as the basting tape is concerned, it will hold in place for you. You don't want to be too rough with it though, because of course it will pull apart. So just try and be gentle at this part right now as you're easing everything through the machine, and make sure that everything is staying in place with the basting tape. Now I'm starting here from the zipper pull end, and I'm putting that part into my machine first. So what I want to do is I want to run the edge of my presser foot along this edge right here. So you want to go straight across, running your foot right here. Now I am going to move my needle to left needle position, and I am going to still sew at a stitch length of 2.5. Now you're going to have a little bit of bulk here, and if you need to make it easier on yourself, roll everything up so that you don't have any bulk getting in the way of the machine. And I start stitching, and then I back stitch. You can see everything is staying in place with that tape. Go slowly. Back stitch, and you're done with the first side. Now take out your work. Now slide back up to the zipper pull again, and this time your presser foot, the edge of your presser foot is going to run on this side. So you're using this edge of the presser foot this time to ride along this edge. And I do need to move my needle position all the way over to the right. So now I'm in position, I start sewing. And again, I'm just going to make sure everything's rolled up here so I can get through the machine easily. And I'm just slowly going, making sure that nothing is moving with that tape there. Everything's staying in place for me. And you're done. And that was the entire zipper going in. It's that easy. We finished sewing in the zipper, And now what we want to do is we want to actually enclose our zipper pocket. So I'm folding my piece in half now. And we have a stitching line right here. I'm going to mark that for you again with the chalk so that you can see where I'm talking about. And this is the stitching line that we originally marked 8 inches down from this top here. And it's the stitching line that we used to sew that contrast fabric into what is now becoming the zipper pocket. So here is the chalk line. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take some pins and put them into the chalk line. And I'm actually going to do it in this direction here. So I'm actually putting them right into the stitching line or the chalk line. They're both the same. And what I want to see is when I turn this over, I want those pins to be sitting on the stitching line on the other side. And they are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to stitch these layers together right along that stitching line, or for you, that chalk line. I have the 2 sections of lining, and we are about to sew on that chalk line, and that's going to be the bottom of the zipper pocket where we're stitching. If your machine has a triple zigzag stitch, I'd like you to set the machine to a triple zigzag, and I want you to use a stitch length of about 0.9, and I want you to go to a stitch width of about 1.5. Now, what I'd like you to do is, I don't want you to start sewing right on the edge here. I want you to go in a 1/2 inch for your 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that's where I want you to start. So go in your 1/2 inch, put down your presser foot, and you're going to start sewing. Now remember, your pins are in perpendicular. You don't want to be hitting those pins, so you do have to pull them out as you go along. So start stitching. Back stitch a little bit. Pull your pins out as you go along. You're going through all of the layers right now. And I want you to stop 1/2 inch before the edge of the fabric. Back stitch, and you're done. Now we'll move back over and I'll show you how to pin for the sides. I want you to take your pins and I want you to put a few pins in the raw edge of both pieces, right through the raw edge of both pieces. So in other words, line up your raw edges and put in your pins. The zipper is virtually folded in half right now. So just the zipper teeth are on top and the tape is folded against itself here. Now, on the underside of both your top and bottom, you had marked your 1/2 inch seam lines. You marked them here and you marked them here. I want you to go ahead and take your Sharpie and I want you to extend out that sewing line, that 1/2 inch sewing line, all the way out to the edge on both pieces, and I want you to darken them up. After you've done that, I want you to take this top piece of lining and I want you to fold it up. You need to get the bulk, this piece right here, out of the way. So just push it out of the way. And I want you to line that black registration line up with this black registration line. I want you to hold it in place and repin through all of those layers. Now I want you to move ahead and pin this piece to this piece under here, the one that we just pinned. And just put in a few pins there just to hold it in place for you. Okay, so that's what it should look like right now. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to take this piece right here. We're going to turn it under. And now I want you to take the black registration line on this side and I want you to line it up with the black registration line here. Make sure everything is out of the way, that there's nothing in between those layers except for this top piece, the two inner pieces where the zipper is, and then the bottom piece. And once you have them lined up, I again want you to repin. Okay? And now these two ends right here should be even with each other. So you have this end and this end. They should be even. And the zipper pocket should be in between those two pieces. So the next step is move your pins and pin through all of your layers. We're going to pin all the way up to the top. There's a lot of bulk here. Take your time. Don't rush this part. There's one part of this project that you do not want to rush. It's this part right here. And when you're done pinning, these two edges at the top should be even. Also, at the top, once you get past the zipper, you're only pinning through 2 layers. And what we're going to do next is we're going to move over to the machine and we're going to stitch from here all the way down to this point right here. We're not stitching off the end, we're only stitching to the end of the registration mark right there. We can go ahead and sew our seam now. I have the zipper coming out of the side of the piece. This is, remember, the side without the zipper pull. Now, we moved our needle position before, so remember to set your machine back at the center needle position. You're on a straight stitch. Now I want you to use a stitch of 3.0. This is where you're really going to appreciate all of these lines that we marked in, because there's so much bulk in here that it's difficult to maneuver this in your machine. And having those lines there are really going to save you and help you to create a nice straight seam. Now, put your work underneath the presser foot. And I want you to start stitching and give a good back stitch. When we get down to the point where the zipper is, that's going to be a lot of bulk there. And I want you to sew right over the zipper. Now, if you need to, when you get to that point, you can hand walk your machine over the zipper. If your machine is having trouble, take your pin out and sew slowly over your zipper. Okay, you can see my machine is giving me a few little blips there, but it's sewed over it because I'm sewing slowly, and also because I have that sharp 9014 needle in there. Now I'm just going to keep sewing on down. Now I just went right for my 3.0 stitch length. If you want to go ahead and baste this in place first with a longer stitch, go for it. Whatever's going to make you feel comfortable getting this piece in place. Now I get it down here, I want to make sure that this little piece right here is out of my way. So I'm pushing it out and I'm holding it. And now I keep sewing. And now I'm down to that black registration line that I created before. That black mark, that dark black one, that's where I want to stop. So I'm going to back stitch. And here now you can see that dark registration line. Now I'm going to stitch one more right up to that point. And now I'm done with that seam. We just finished sewing up the first side of our lining, and now I'm going to show you how to prepare your piece and pin up your piece to sew the second side seam. We're working now from the side of the zipper that has the zipper pull on it. And I want you to pull that back somewhere around here, because if we sew it out here, if we sew our side seam out here, we're going to be sewing the zipper pull outside of the bag and we won't be able to open it. So first thing, remember to open up your zipper pull. Now, on the outside of the fleece where we had made these dark lines or 1/2 inch seam lines, I want you to go ahead and mark a little registration mark right here with your Sharpie, right on that 1/2 inch seam line. Then I want you to do the same thing on the other side. You're marking a dark line on the 1/2 inch seam line. Now, we had previously put registration marks here, and this is at the bottom of the zipper pocket where we stitch straight across. This line here is that 8 inches down that we measured from the top. So one registration mark here on this side, and then there was another one here on this side. Now, the next step, you're going to take this registration line and you're going to match it up with the registration line here. So you match them up just like this, and you put in a pin. All the way through, you're going through 3 layers. going completely through the zipper pocket. Then just to hold everything in place here, pull the bulk out of the way, put in another zipper, put in another pin. Now I want you to take this registration mark and match it up with this registration mark on the other side. So you're going to put those pieces together. These ends right here should be even. And then you're going to move your pin one more time and place it through now all 4 layers. So this is what you should have so far. Once you have that pinned, I want you to start moving up the side and placing pins in every few inches. Keep all your raw edges even. So keep working up. Now over here where we opened up this zipper is just going to lay flat on itself. I don't know if you can see it very well from there, but this is how we want it to look. Flat against each other on both sides. Keep pinning. And your tops should be even with each other. If they're not even, either you cut crooked or you need to just readjust your pins a little bit. And now I am just going to readjust my pins because I probably didn't pin quite evenly because my top wasn't perfectly even. So I just readjusted a few pins. Now, what we want to do is we want to sew from all the way up here, all the way down the seam line, and we're going to stop right here at the black registration line, the way we did for the other side. So next step, we'll go over to the sewing machine and we'll sew the side seam down. I'm going to be putting this piece into the sewing machine now, and we're going to stay on that half line. We start all the way up the top. We stay on that 1/2 inch seam line. We're going to go all the way down to the bottom, and we are going to stop right here at that registration mark. Now on the last one I said to you, you may need to hand walk over your zipper if your machine doesn't want to sew over it. And my machine did sew over it. So this time I'm actually going to hand walk it over for you so you see what I'm talking about there. So I put it into the machine. I'm going to sew with a 3.0 stitch length. I'm on a straight stitch and I'm in center needle position. I start to sew, I back stitch, I take out my pins. Okay, I'm at my zipper now. So to hand walk it, I'm going to take my hand wheel on the right side of my machine and I'm just going to turn it manually. That's what we mean when we say walk over the zipper. And you always turn your hand wheel towards you. You just want to get past the zipper teeth. Once you get past the zipper teeth, you can stop doing this. Now I am past the zipper teeth, and I'm going to continue to sew. Keep sewing all the way down. Remember, you're going through a lot of thickness right now. You're going through 4 layers of fabric and fleece. As you get closer to the bottom, make sure that everything is pulled out of the way. You don't want anything in front of this line. We're looking at the side of the bag right now where we just sewed our seam. This right here is the bottom of the bag, and we need to sew the bottom of the bag closed. So what I want you to do now is I want you to pull this nice and tight, okay? That's how it looks on that side, and that's how it looks on this side. And I want you to put in a couple of pins. Now it's important if there's any bulk down there to push it out of the way. So just reach your hand in, and there's that zipper pocket in there. You just want to push it out of the way. Now what we want to do is we want to sew from this end right here right into that point, right where we stopped, that previous line of stitching at the registration mark. So I put the piece into the machine, I stitch, a back stitch. If your machine comes off the line, just pick it up and put it back on again. Back stitch. This is a very awkward seam to do. There's a lot of bulk in there, so just go slowly. And then back stitch it when you get up to the registration mark. Okay, so I've sewn from this point right to that point, and I did not catch any of this middle seam, this side seam in there, and I don't want to. You don't want to catch any of this seam in this stitching line here. Now we're going to go and we're going to stitch the other side. So get your hand back down in the bag, smooth everything out. Pull everything over to the side, just like that. Put in a couple of pins. Make sure everything is smooth. On this side, you want everything smooth on that side. Put in your pins. I'm going to check my underside now. Now you can see here, I caught a little bit of fabric with my pin right here. I want to get that out of there. I don't want any puckers in there. So I'm going to take that pin out, and I'm going to pull this a little bit to straighten it out. Put my pin back in. And I double check it. That looks better. This time I'm going to put the piece in this way. I'm going to drop my needle right into that point, right there, right at the end of that seam line. Put the needle in. I actually hand turned my hand wheel towards me to get the needle down in there. I take a few stitches forward, a few stitches backwards, and then I sew across. And now, both of these sides have been sewn closed, and I did not catch any of this in there. None of this side seam is in that, and we don't want it to be. Now I cut all my threads. Now, if you want, and I do this a lot, you can go over this bottom seam a second time to give some extra added strength to the bottom of the lining. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. If you'd like to, you can go ahead and do that also, and then I'm going to show you how to stitch the other side. Now I've moved to the other side of the bag. This is my side seam. This is the bottom of the bag. And we want to pin the same way we did on the other side. So I will be putting my pins in, and I will be stopping here. I'm going to start my seam right here. I'm going to sew across the registration line that we marked in at the beginning with our 1/2 inch seams, and I'm going to stop right here at the point where this seam comes down. So again, make sure there's no bulk under there, nothing that should be there, nothing that's there that shouldn't be there. Put in a couple of pins. Okay, and I have nothing caught in my pins on the other side, so I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to sew, back stitch, take out my pins, sew, you might need to give a little tug to your piece. And then back stitch when you hit that registration line. Now you can see the line that I just stitched ends right where this line comes down over here. So I'm in the right spot. Now I'm going to pin this side. All the bulk is out of the way. You can always reach your hand inside and push that zipper pocket aside. You don't want that getting in the way. You don't need any more bulk that's already there. Put in a couple of pins. Make sure nothing's caught on the other side. Get everything under your presser foot. Hand turn your hand wheel towards you to drop in the needle. Stitch, back stitch, back stitch. And now you've finished sewing your bottom seam. Now I want to show this to you because I know it's going to happen. You guys are going to turn this over and you're going to go, oh, it doesn't match. Oh no, what am I going to do? To be perfectly honest with you, sometimes it matches up, sometimes it doesn't. If it matches up, go give yourself a real huge pat on the back because you did a great job. But the nature of what we're doing here, it is very difficult to get those seams to match up. And the object of the game is not to get them to match. The object of the game is to close your lining so that nothing falls out of your lining when you put things into your bag. And that is going to work perfectly well just like that. Now, I am going to go and restitch over those lines one more time to give it a little bit of added strength. We are going to go and trim the seams on the outside of this lining to reduce bulk when it goes into our bag. But what I'd like you to do before you trim anything is I want you to just look down into your bag where you made that bottom seam, check and see if you see any holes in your seam, poke your fingers in there, see if you feel any holes, turn it to the other side, do the same thing, just kind of look in there, see if you see any openings in the seam, poke with your fingers. If you don't feel any holes, you're good. So now we're going to go and trim our seams. Now we want to trim the seams. We want to get rid of all this extra bulk so it's not clogging up our bag. So just get yourself some good sharp scissors and trim right across the bottom. Careful that you don't cut yourself. Now, I just finished trimming the bottom, and I've turned this to trim along the side seam. So we just start cutting. You're going to cut right through that zipper tail. You're cutting through a lot of bulk right now, so just go slowly. Have some good sharp scissors on hand. Now we have the bottom trimmed and the side seam trimmed. I want you to go to the other side and trim the bottom there and the side there. We have the bag here with the flap basted on. And now comes the really exciting part. I always love it when I get to finally put the lining inside the bag. We're going to put it down into the bag. Now, we have the three section pocket towards the back of the bag. That's the one that has the little section where you could put pencils and pens in. That's what I like to have back here. Now, what you want to do is you want to really push that lining down to the bottom. Just reach in, push it down, get it into place, and all of these edges should be dead even. Okay? Now, if you push this all the way down and those edges are not dead even, you're just going to trim it. There's really nothing else you could do at that point but to trim it. But if you've measured and sewn correctly, it should look just like this. Now, this is also your last chance to check your flap placement. You want to fold it over and you want to snap it closed. And then you just want to look and see if everything looks like it's where it should be. And if you're happy with how everything looks, we're going to go to the last two steps. So you're going to open this up. And we want to pin baste the outer bag to the inner bag. And you want to make sure that you're careful matching up all of your side seams. So go ahead and grab your pins and start basting all of the layers together with your pins. I now have the outer bag pin basted to the inner bag, and we're going to go over to the machine to baste these pieces together. Now, we're not doing a 1/2 inch seam here. We're just basically going to take the presser foot and ride the edge of the presser foot along the raw edge of the bag, because it is just a basting for right now. We have the bag in the machine now. It's been pin basted with the outer bag pinned to the inner bag, and we are just going to baste the layers together. I'm going to run the edge of the presser foot along the raw edge of both sections. And I'm going to actually do it maybe at a 3.0 stitch length. If you have a walking foot, this actually is a good time to use your walking foot. We don't want any of those layers to shift on us in any way. We want to keep the edges nice and even. I am working on the free arm of the sewing machine. Makes it much easier to handle. Okay, I'm coming up to the end here now. And we're done with our basting. The next step will be we're going to put in a little keychain holder inside the bag, and then we'll bind the bag, and you're virtually done at that point. Now I'd like you to go and find piece N, and piece N is for your key holder that will go inside the bag. We're going to put that in the bag before we bind off the top of the bag. And it's the piece that has the fusible fleece on the wrong side. And it should measure 3 inches by 7 inches. I want you to take that piece and mark a 5/8 inch seam line. Then just fold it in half, go to the sewing machine, and sew this seam down. Once you're done with that, come back here and we're going to press this open and turn it right side out. I just finished sewing that seam, so now I'm going to press the seam open. Just going to lay it flat. Press it. Now I want you to take your scissors. I'd really like you to trim this seam way down, probably to about 1/4 of an inch. Then I'd like you to go and get your fast turn tools. I want you to find the size that's the proper size that will fit in this opening here. And I want you to turn this the same exact way that you turned your strap anchors. Now, if you want, again, you can just do a folding method for this. So let's go turn our pieces and then we'll meet back here. I just finished turning my little tab for my keychain holder, and now I'm going to put it through the swivel here. Clover makes 2 sizes. I'm going to use a smaller one. This is a 3/4 inch swivel. If you want to use the larger one, you can. You might want to make this tab a little bit wider if you decide to use the larger one. I only ever put 1 set of keys on here, so I don't feel that I really need that larger hook. So I'm going to go ahead and use the little one, and this again is the 3/4 inch. And that's how it should look. Now we're going to pin that into the side of the bag and baste it down. I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. I'll show you how to position that into the bag, and we'll baste it down, and after that our next step is binding, and at that point we're very close to being done. I have the keychain holder pinned into the side of the bag. I like to put it into the back section of the bag where the 3 pockets are. And I like to put it on the left side. So if I'm looking at the bag, when I open it up, my keychain holder is going to be on the left side. So figure out what the center of your side section is here and pin it in the center of that section. I'm just going to go into the machine now, and we're just going to tack it down with a little bit of basting. The bag is in the machine now, and I'm just going to let the edge of the press-a-foot right along the raw edge of the top of the bag, and we're going to baste that in right now. I'm using a stitch length of 3.0, and I'm on a straight stitch. And that's all we need to do to baste. Now, one last thing, I want you to put the bag on the free arm of your machine, and you're going to be going through all layers. You want to go through the anchor, the outside bag, and the lining. What we're going to do is we're going to sew a line right over the line that we have on the anchor already. We're going to use a triple zigzag set at a 0.9 stitch length and a 1.5 stitch width. Doing this is really going to strengthen this point here, because as I told you, this takes all the weight of the bag. So by securing all of these 3 layers together, That should help a lot carrying the weight of the bag. And I want you to go over this line twice. Okay, that was the first time. Now I'm just going to double back and do it one more time, and then you can take it out of your machine. And there you're done. Go ahead and sew through all layers on both anchors, so both sides of the bag.